The story of the book of Genesis, the creation story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was a desolate, barren landscape, devoid of life. The only sound was the gentle whisper of the wind, carrying the whispers of God's creative power. The Spirit of God hovered over the waters, casting a warm, golden glow over the dark, mysterious depths. As God spoke, his words echoed through the void, bringing forth light and banishing the darkness. "Let there be light," God declared, and instantly, the darkness was illuminated by a brilliant, radiant glow. The light danced across the waters, casting shimmering ripples across the surface. The light was not just a physical phenomenon but a spiritual one as well. It represented the presence of God, who is light, and the separation of light from darkness symbolized the separation of good from evil. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. On the second day, God created the sky, separating the waters above from the waters below. The sky was a brilliant blue, with clouds of white and grey that drifted lazily across the horizon. The sky was not just a physical barrier but a spiritual one as well, separating the heavens from the earth. On the third day, God gathered the waters under the sky and created the land. The land was a vast, sprawling continent, with mountains and valleys, rivers and lakes. The land was teeming with life, from the tiniest microbe to the mightiest tree. God saw that the land was good, and he called it earth. On the fourth day, God created the sun, moon, and stars to give light to the earth and to separate the day from the night. The sun was a brilliant, blazing ball of fire, shining brightly in the sky. The moon was a silver crescent, glowing softly in the night. The stars were a twinkling, sparkling array of lights, scattered across the velvet blackness of the universe. On the fifth day, God created the fish and birds to fill the waters and the skies. The fish were a shimmering, shining array of colors, darting and weaving through the coral reefs and schools of plankton. The birds were a chorus of song and color, flitting and flying through the trees and across the skies. On the sixth day, God created the animals and finally, humanity. God created humanity in his own image, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it." And so, the creation story came to a close. God had created a world of beauty and wonder, teeming with life and filled with his presence. The creation story is a testament to God's power and wisdom, and it sets the stage for the rest of the biblical narrative. The story of Adam and Eve. The first humans, Adam and Eve, lived in the Garden of Eden, a paradise created by God. The garden was a lush, verdant oasis, filled with trees and flowers, rivers and streams. Adam and Eve were created to live in harmony with God and with each other. Adam was formed from the dust of the ground, and God breathed into him the breath of life. Adam became a living being, with a body and soul. Eve was created from one of Adam's ribs, while he was in a deep sleep. Adam woke up to find Eve standing before him, and he was immediately drawn to her. Adam and Eve lived in the garden, surrounded by beauty and wonder. They had a perfect relationship with God, walking with him in the garden. They had a perfect relationship with each other, loving and respecting each other. They were naked, but they were not ashamed. But Satan, disguised as a serpent, tempted Eve to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eve was convinced that eating the fruit would make her and Adam like God, knowing good and evil. She convinced Adam to join her, and they both ate the fruit. Their eyes were opened, and they realized they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. But when God came to walk with them in the garden, they hid. God called out to Adam, "Where are you?" Adam replied, "I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." God asked, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the serpent. As a result of their disobedience, God cursed the serpent, Eve, and Adam. The expulsion from the garden. As Adam and Eve stood before God, they felt a deep sense of shame and guilt. They had disobeyed God's command, and now they had to face the consequences. God's voice was firm but sorrowful as he pronounced the curse. "You will crawl on your belly, and dust will be your food," God said to the serpent. You will be enemies, you and the woman, and your offspring and hers." The serpent hissed and slithered away, its body contorting in a sinuous curve. To Eve, God said, "I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Eve felt a pang of fear and anxiety as she realized the difficulties she would face in childbirth. To Adam, God said, "Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return." Adam felt a deep sense of regret and sorrow as he realized the difficulties he would face in cultivating the land. He knew that he and Eve would have to work hard to survive outside the garden. The garments of skin. After pronouncing the curse, God made garments of skin for Adam and Eve. The garments were soft and supple, made from the finest animal hides. Adam and Eve felt a sense of gratitude and relief as they put on the garments, covering their nakedness. The expulsion with the garments of skin, Adam and Eve were ready to leave the garden. God drove them out, and an angel with a flaming sword guarded the entrance to the garden. Adam and Eve looked back at the garden, feeling a deep sense of loss and longing. They knew they would never return to the paradise they had once known. The story of Cain and Abel. After leaving the garden, Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain was a farmer, and Abel was a shepherd. Both brothers brought offerings to God, but God looked with favor on Abel's offering and not on Cain's. Cain became angry and jealous, feeling that God had unfairly rejected his offering. God asked Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, it desires to have you, but you must master it." Cain did not listen to God's warning. He led Abel to a field and killed him. God asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain replied, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" God said, "What have you done? Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." Cain was banished, and he lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. He built a city and named it Enoch after his son. The genealogy of Adam. The genealogy of Adam is recorded in Genesis 5. Adam had a son named Seth, who was born when Adam was 130 years old. Seth had a son named Enosh, who was born when Seth was 105 years old. Enosh had a son named Kenan, who was born when Enosh was 90 years old. Kenan had a son named Mahalaleel, who was born when Kenan was 70 years old. Mahalaleel had a son named Jared, who was born when Mahalaleel was 65 years old. Jared had a son named Enoch, who was born when Jared was 162 years old. Enoch was a righteous man who walked with God. He did not die but was taken directly to heaven by God. Enoch had a son named Methuselah, who was born when Enoch was 65 years old. Methuselah had a son named Lamech, who was born when Methuselah was 187 years old. Lamech had a son named Noah, who was born when Lamech was 182 years old. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. He walked with God, just like Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden. Noah's heart was pure, and his faith was strong. He believed in God's promises and obeyed his commands. God saw that the wickedness of humanity had reached its peak. He decided to destroy the earth with a flood, but he chose Noah and his family to survive. God instructed Noah to build an ark, a large boat that would save him, his family, and two of every kind of animal. Noah obeyed God's command and began building the ark. He worked tirelessly, day and night, using his skills as a carpenter to construct the massive vessel. The ark was 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It was made of gopher wood and covered with pitch. As Noah worked on the ark, he preached to the people around him, warning them of the coming flood. But they laughed at him and ignored his warnings. They were wicked and corrupt, and they did not believe in God. The animals enter the ark. When the ark was complete, God instructed Noah to enter the ark with his family and the animals. Noah obeyed, and the animals came to the ark in pairs. There were lions and tigers, bears and wolves, elephants and giraffes, and many other creatures. They all came to the ark, 2 by 2, and entered the vessel. Noah and his family entered the ark, and God shut the door behind them. The ark was sealed, and the floodgates of heaven were opened. The rains poured down, and the floodwaters rose. The earth was destroyed, and all living things were wiped out. The flood was a catastrophic event that destroyed the earth. The rains poured down for 40 days and 40 nights, and the floodwaters rose to cover the highest mountains. The earth was underwater, and all living things were destroyed. The flood was a judgment from God, a punishment for the wickedness of humanity. But Noah and his family were safe inside the ark. They rode out the flood, surrounded by the animals and the provisions that God had instructed them to bring. The ark floated on the floodwaters, a symbol of salvation and hope. The ark lands after 150 days, the floodwaters began to recede. The ark landed on the mountains of Ararat, and Noah released a dove, a raven, and a swallow to see if the floodwaters had receded. When the dove did not return, Noah knew that the floodwaters had receded, and the earth was dry. The sacrifice Noah and his family exited the ark, and they built an altar to worship God. They offered sacrifices to God, thanking him for their salvation. God smelled the pleasing aroma of the sacrifices and made a covenant with Noah. The covenant God promised never again to destroy the earth with a flood. He set the rainbow in the sky as a sign of his covenant with Noah. The rainbow was a symbol of hope and promise, a reminder of God's mercy and love. The story of Noah's sons after the flood, Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, repopulated the earth. They had children and grandchildren, and their descendants spread across the earth. Noah lived to be 950 years old, and he died, leaving behind a legacy of faith and obedience. The story of Noah teaches us about God's judgment and mercy. It shows us that God is a righteous judge who punishes wickedness, but he is also a loving Father who saves those who trust in him. The story of the Tower of Babel. After the flood, humanity began to multiply and spread across the earth. They settled in the plain of Shinar, in what is now modern-day Iraq. The people of Shinar were ambitious and proud, determined to build a city and a tower that would reach the heavens. The tower was a massive structure made of bricks and mortar. It rose high into the air, a symbol of human pride and achievement. The people of Shinar worked tirelessly to build the tower, using their skills and ingenuity to construct a monument that would last forever. But God saw the tower and the pride of the people of Shinar. He knew that their ambition and pride would lead to their downfall. God decided to confuse their language so that they could no longer understand each other. The confusion of language. God came down from heaven and saw the tower. He said, if as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. And so, God confused the language of the people of Shinar. Suddenly, they could no longer understand each other. They spoke in different languages, and their words were unintelligible to each other. The people of Shinar were confused and frustrated, unable to communicate with each other. The scattering of humanity. The confusion of language led to the scattering of humanity. The people of Shinar were no longer able to work together, and their city and tower were abandoned. They spread out across the earth, settling in different lands and developing different languages and cultures. And so, the story of the Tower of Babel teaches us about the dangers of pride and ambition. It shows us that when we try to reach the heavens on our own, we will fail. But it also shows us that God is a loving Father who wants to bless and prosper us, even when we make mistakes. The genealogy of Shem. The genealogy of Shem, one of Noah's sons, is recorded in Genesis 11. Shem had a son named Arphaxad, who was born 2 years after the flood. Arphaxad had a son named Shelah, who was born when Arphaxad was 35 years old. Shelah had a son named Eber, who was born when Shelah was 30 years old. Eber had 2 sons, Peleg and Joktan. Peleg's descendant settled in the region of Babylon, while Joktan's descendant settled in the region of Arabia. The genealogy of Shem is important because it shows us the connection between the early descendants of Noah and the later history of the Israelites. The story of Terah was a descendant of Shem, and he lived in the city of Ur, in what is now modern-day Iraq. Terah had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Abram was the father of Isaac, who was the father of Jacob, who was the father of the Israelites. Terah took his family and left Ur, intending to go to the land of Canaan. But they settled in the city of Haran, where Terah died. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran with his wife, Sarai, and his nephew, Lot. And so, the story of the Tower of Babel and the genealogy of Shem sets the stage for the story of Abram, who would become the father of the Israelites. The story of Abram was a descendant of Shem, and he lived in the city of Haran with his wife, Sarai, and his nephew, Lot. Abram was 75 years old when he received a call from God to leave Haran and go to the land of Canaan. God promised Abram that he would make him the father of a great nation, and that he would bless him and make his name great. Abram obeyed God's command and left Haran with his family and his possessions. As they journeyed to Canaan, Abram and his family encountered many challenges. They had to cross rivers and mountains, and they had to deal with hostile tribes and wild animals. But Abram trusted in God's promise, and he persevered in the face of adversity. The promise of Canaan. When Abram arrived in Canaan, he saw that it was a beautiful and fertile land. He pitched his tent near the oak tree of Moreh, and he built an altar to worship God. God appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." Abram believed God's promise, and he trusted that God would fulfill it. The story of Lot, Abram's nephew, was also a descendant of Shem. He had accompanied Abram on his journey to Canaan, and he had settled in the city of Sodom. But Sodom was a wicked and corrupt city, and Lot's family was affected by its evil influence. Lot's wife and daughters were seduced by the wickedness of Sodom, and they were eventually destroyed when God rained down fire and brimstone on the city. The rescue of Lot. When God decided to destroy Sodom, he sent 2 angels to rescue Lot and his family. The angels appeared to Lot as men, and they told him to leave the city immediately. Lot hesitated, and the angels had to grab him and his family to lead them out of the city. As they left, Lot's wife looked back at Sodom, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. The promise of Isaac. After Lot's family was rescued, Abram received another promise from God. God said, "I will make you the father of a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great." Abram believed God's promise, and he trusted that God would fulfill it. He was 99 years old when God changed his name to Abraham, which means father of many nations. The birth of Ishmael. Abraham's wife, Sarai, was barren and could not have children. She gave her servant, Hagar, to Abraham as a concubine, and Hagar bore a son named Ishmael. Ishmael was born when Abraham was 86 years old. But God told Abraham that Ishmael was not the son of promise. Instead, God promised that Sarah would bear a son, and that son would be the heir of Abraham's inheritance. The covenant of circumcision. When Abraham was 99 years old, God made a covenant with him. God said, "I will make you the father of a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great." As a sign of the covenant, God instructed Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household. Abraham obeyed God's command, and he circumcised himself and all the males in his household. The promise of Isaac. Again, after Abraham circumcised himself and his household, God appeared to him again. God said, "I will bless you and make your name great. You will be the father of many nations." Abraham believed God's promise, and he trusted that God would fulfill it. He was 100 years old when his wife, Sarah, bore a son named Isaac. Isaac was the son of promise, and he was the heir of Abraham's inheritance. Abraham loved Isaac dearly, and he was willing to sacrifice him as a burnt offering to God. The story of Isaac. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old. He was the son of promise, and he was the heir of Abraham's inheritance. As Isaac grew up, he learned about God's promise to his father. He believed in God's promise, and he trusted that God would fulfill it. When Isaac was a young man, God tested Abraham's faith. God instructed Abraham to take Isaac to the land of Moriah and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. Abraham obeyed God's command, and he took Isaac to the land of Moriah. But just as Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac, God stopped him. God provided a ram as a substitute for Isaac, and Abraham sacrificed the ram instead. The story of Rebekah. After the sacrifice of the ram, Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac. The servant traveled to the city of Naor, where Abraham's brother Laban lived. When he arrived, he saw a beautiful young woman named Rebekah, who was Laban's daughter. Rebekah was kind and generous, and she offered to draw water from the well for the servant and his camels. The servant was impressed by Rebekah's beauty and kindness, and he knew that she would be the perfect wife for Isaac. The servant told Laban and his family about Abraham's wealth and blessings, and he asked for Rebekah's hand in marriage. Laban and his family agreed, and Rebekah was betrothed to Isaac. The marriage of Isaac and Rebekah were married in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by their family and friends. Isaac loved Rebekah dearly, and she became his wife and companion. Rebekah was a blessing to Isaac, and she brought joy and happiness into his life. She was a kind and gentle soul, and she loved Isaac with all her heart. The twins Esau and Jacob. After many years of marriage, Rebekah became pregnant with twins. The twins struggled and fought inside her womb, and Rebekah was in great discomfort. When the twins were born, the first one to come out was Esau, who was red and hairy. The second twin was Jacob, who was holding on to Esau's heel. Esau grew up to be a skilled hunter, and he loved the outdoors. Jacob, on the other hand, was a quiet and peaceful man, who loved to stay at home and cook. The story of Esau and Jacob. Esau and Jacob were very different, and they had different interests and personalities. Esau was impulsive and reckless, while Jacob was careful and thoughtful. One day, Esau came back from hunting, and he was very hungry. Jacob was cooking a stew, and Esau asked him for some food. Jacob agreed to give Esau some food, but only if he would sell him his birthright. Esau agreed, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. This was a significant moment, because the birthright was a symbol of the blessing and inheritance that God had promised to Abraham. The story of Isaac and Abimelech. As Isaac grew older, he became more and more like his father Abraham. He was a man of faith, and he trusted in God's promises. One day, Isaac and his family went to the land of the Philistines, where they met a king named Abimelech. Abimelech was impressed by Isaac's wealth and blessings, and he asked him to make a treaty with him. Isaac agreed, and he made a treaty with Abimelech. The treaty was a symbol of the peace and prosperity that God had promised to Abraham and his descendants. The story of Esau's marriage. Esau grew up and got married to two Hittite women, Judith and Basemath. But his marriages were not blessed by God, and they brought trouble and conflict into his life. Esau's marriages were a symbol of his rejection of God's promises and blessings. He had sold his birthright to Jacob, and now he was reaping the consequences of his actions. The story of Jacob's journey. Jacob was a man of faith, and he trusted in God's promises. He knew that he was the rightful heir of the blessing and inheritance that God had promised to Abraham. One day, Jacob decided to journey to the land of Haran, where his uncle Laban lived. He wanted to find a wife and start a family, and he knew that Laban's daughters would be the perfect match for him. As Jacob journeyed to Haran, he had a vision from God. God appeared to him in a dream, and he promised to bless him and make him the father of a great nation. The story of Jacob and Rachel. When Jacob arrived in Haran, he met Laban's daughters, Rachel and Leah. Rachel was beautiful and kind, and Jacob fell in love with her immediately. Laban agreed to let Jacob marry Rachel, but only if he would work for him for 7 years. Jacob agreed, and he worked for Laban for 7 years. But when the 7 years were over, Laban tricked Jacob and gave him Leah instead of Rachel. Jacob was angry and disappointed, but he eventually married Rachel as well. The story of Jacob's children. Jacob had 12 sons with Rachel and Leah, and they became the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's sons were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Each of Jacob's sons received a blessing from their father, which reflected their unique characteristics and destinies to the power of one. These blessings also had a profound impact on the future of the Israelites. The number 12 is significant in the Bible, representing completeness, perfection, and God's covenant with his people. The 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 12 apostles of Jesus all reflect this theme. The story of Joseph. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, and he was born when Jacob was 91 years old. Joseph's mother was Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife. Joseph was a handsome and intelligent young man, and he was loved by his father more than any of his other sons. Joseph had a special gift from God, the ability to interpret dreams. When he was 17 years old, Joseph had a dream that he would one day rule over his brothers. He shared his dream with his brothers, but they were jealous and resentful. Joseph's brothers were jealous of the special attention he received from their father. They were also angry about Joseph's dreams, which they saw as a threat to their own status and power. One day, Joseph's brothers were tending their father's flocks in the fields near Shechem. Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers and see how they were doing. When Joseph arrived, his brothers saw an opportunity to get rid of him. The betrayal of Joseph. Joseph's brothers conspired against him and decided to sell him into slavery. They stripped him of his coat and threw him into a pit. Then, they sold him to a group of Ishmaelite traders who were passing by. The traders took Joseph to Egypt, where he was sold to a wealthy Egyptian named Potiphar. Potiphar was a high-ranking official in the Egyptian government, and he was known for his wisdom and integrity. The rise of Joseph in Egypt. Joseph quickly rose through the ranks in Potiphar's household. He became the chief steward and was responsible for managing Potiphar's estate. Joseph's intelligence, wisdom, and hard work earned him the respect and admiration of his master. But Joseph's success was not without its challenges. Potiphar's wife, who was beautiful and seductive, tried to tempt Joseph into committing adultery with her. Joseph resisted her advances, but she falsely accused him of trying to seduce her. The imprisonment of Joseph. As a result of the false accusation, Joseph was thrown into prison. But even in prison, Joseph's gifts and abilities were recognized. He quickly rose to a position of leadership among the prisoners and earned the respect of the prison guards. One day, the Pharaoh of Egypt had a dream that no one could interpret. The Pharaoh's cupbearer, who had been in prison with Joseph, remembered Joseph's gift of interpreting dreams. He told the Pharaoh about Joseph, and the Pharaoh sent for him. The interpretation of the Pharaoh's dream. Joseph interpreted the Pharaoh's dream, which was a prophecy of 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. The Pharaoh was impressed by Joseph's wisdom and insight, and he appointed him as his second-in-command. Joseph's rise to power in Egypt was meteoric. He became the most powerful man in Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh. He was responsible for managing the Egyptian economy and ensuring that the country was prepared for the coming famine. The reunion of Joseph and his brothers. Years later, when the famine struck, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt seeking food. They did not recognize Joseph, who was now a powerful and wealthy man. Joseph, however, recognized his brothers and decided to test their character. Joseph accused his brothers of being spies and threw them into prison. But then, he released them and told them to return to their father and bring back their youngest brother, Benjamin. The return of Joseph's brothers returned to their father and told him about their encounter with the Egyptian official. Jacob was hesitant to let Benjamin go, but eventually, he agreed. When Joseph's brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph revealed his true identity to them. He forgave them for their past betrayal and invited them to stay in Egypt with him. The blessing of Jacob. Years later, when Jacob was old and dying, he called his sons to his bedside and blessed them. He also blessed Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and adopted them as his own. Jacob's blessing was a prophecy of the future of his sons and their descendants. He blessed Judah, saying that he would be the leader of the tribe. The blessing of Judah. Jacob's blessing of Judah was significant, as it marked him as the leader of the tribe. Judah's descendants would eventually become the ruling dynasty of Israel, producing kings such as David and Solomon. Judah's blessing also included a prophecy about the coming Messiah, who would be a descendant of Judah. This prophecy would be fulfilled centuries later, when Jesus Christ was born into the tribe of Judah. The blessing of Joseph. Jacob's blessing of Joseph was also significant, as it marked him as a leader and a blessing to his brothers. Joseph's descendants would eventually become a powerful and numerous tribe, playing a key role in the history of Israel. Joseph's blessing also included a prophecy about his future, in which he would be a fruitful bough and his branches would run over the wall. This prophecy would be fulfilled when Joseph became a powerful leader in Egypt, providing for his brothers and their families during the famine. The blessing of the other sons. Jacob's blessing of his other sons was also significant, as it marked them as part of the tribe of Israel. Each son received a unique blessing, reflecting their individual characteristics and strengths. Reuben, the firstborn, received a blessing that acknowledged his leadership role, but also warned him about his impulsive nature. Simeon and Levi received a blessing that acknowledged their strength and courage, but also warned them about their violent tendencies. Zebulun received a blessing that acknowledged his role as a sailor and a trader, and predicted that he would be a source of prosperity for his family. Issachar received a blessing that acknowledged his strength and industriousness, and predicted that he would be a source of wealth and prosperity. Dan received a blessing that acknowledged his role as a judge and a leader, and predicted that he would be a source of wisdom and guidance. Gad received a blessing that acknowledged his strength and courage, and predicted that he would be a source of protection and defense. Asher received a blessing that acknowledged his role as a provider and a source of prosperity, and predicted that he would be a source of joy and happiness. Naphtali received a blessing that acknowledged his role as a messenger and a source of news, and predicted that he would be a source of speed and agility. Benjamin received a blessing that acknowledged his role as a source of strength and courage, and predicted that he would be a source of prosperity and wealth. The death of Jacob. After blessing his sons, Jacob died at the age of 147. His sons buried him in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac were buried. Jacob's death marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Israel. His sons would go on to become the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel, and they would play a key role in shaping the future of the nation. The burial of Jacob. The burial of Jacob was a significant event, as it marked the end of his life on earth. His sons buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which was a sacred place for the family. The cave of Machpelah was a symbol of the family's connection to the land and their heritage. It was a reminder of the promises that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it was a symbol of the family's faith and trust in God. The legacy of Jacob. Jacob's legacy was one of faith, perseverance, and obedience. He was a man who trusted in God's promises and obeyed his commands, even when it was difficult. Jacob's legacy also included his 12 sons, who would go on to become the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. They would play a key role in shaping the future of the nation and fulfilling the promises that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The future of Israel. The future of Israel was bright, despite the challenges and obstacles that lay ahead. The nation would face many trials and tribulations, but they would also experience many blessings and victories. The nation would be led by a series of judges, prophets, and kings, who would guide them and help them to fulfill their destiny. Would face many challenges, including wars with neighboring nations, internal conflicts, and spiritual struggles. But through it all, the nation of Israel would remain faithful to God, trusting in His promises and obeying His commands. They would be a source of blessing to the world, fulfilling their role as a light to the nations. And so, the story of Jacob and his sons comes to an end, but the story of Israel is just beginning. The nation would go on to experience many triumphs and tragedies, but through it all, they would remain faithful to God and fulfill their destiny as a chosen people. The story of Joseph's leadership. After Jacob's death, Joseph continued to serve as a leader in Egypt. He was a wise and just ruler, loved by the Egyptians and respected by his brothers. Joseph's leadership was marked by wisdom, compassion, and integrity. He worked tirelessly to ensure that the Egyptians had enough food to eat, and he was generous to his brothers and their families. The story of Joseph's family. Joseph's family was a source of joy and comfort to him. He was married to an Egyptian woman named Asenath, and they had 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph's sons were a blessing to him, and he loved them dearly. He taught them about God and the ways of their ancestors, and he encouraged them to be faithful to the Lord. The story of Jacob's prophecy. Before Jacob died, he prophesied about the future of his sons. He said that Judah would be the leader of the tribe, and that he would produce a king who would rule over Israel. Jacob also prophesied about the other tribes, saying that they would each have a special role to play in the future of Israel. He encouraged them to be faithful to God and to work together as a team. The story of Joseph's prophecy. Joseph also prophesied about the future of Israel. He said that the Israelites would one day leave Egypt and return to the Promised Land. Joseph's prophecy was a source of hope and encouragement to the Israelites. They knew that they would face many challenges and difficulties in the future, but they also knew that God was with them and that He would guide them. The story of Joseph's death. Joseph died at the age of 110, surrounded by his family and friends. He was a wise and just leader, loved by the Egyptians and respected by his brothers. Joseph's death marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Israel. The Israelites would continue to live in Egypt, but they would also begin to look forward to the day when they would return to the Promised Land. Thank you very much for watching this video to the end. Please like, comment, share and subscribe.